It's 6:30. I call the
excuse me,
it's
the May
6:30.
12th
I
Planning
call
Board
the
meeting to order. Excuse me, the May 12th Planning Board meeting to order. First on the agenda is approval of the minutes, Mr. Secretary. First on the agenda is approval of the minutes, Mr. Secretary.
I recommend approval of the minutes of April 21st. I recommend approval of the minutes of site visit, April 21st, and the regular meeting of the regular meeting and the site visit.
I'll second.
And the regular meeting of April 28th.
Any comments?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Comments? Opposed? Abstain. All in
Okay.
favor? Then we move
Aye.
on to approval
Opposed?
not
Abstain.
required plans.
Okay.
Then we move on
We
to
have
approval not
one.
required plans. The applicant is Green
We
Cove
have
LLC
one.
to create 8
The
lots.
applicant is
Falmouth
Green Cove
Engineering
LLC
is the engineering
to
firm.
create 8 lots.
Falmouth
As
Engineering
usual on
is
the
the
A-
engineering firm.
Excuse me.
On the, as usual
AR.
on the A, excuse me, on the AR. Sorry, I've been having pollen problems today, the ANRs.
Sorry, I've been
Thank you,
having
Brian. Pollen problems today, the ANRs.
Thank you, Brian.
Could I have, as usual, a motion
and got a
on,
dose of it, the ANR.
could I have, as usual,
Yes,
a
Ken.
motion
I make a
on
motion that
the
we
ANR?
do not recommend.
Yes, Ken.
I make a motion that we
I
do
make a
not
motion that we
recommend.
do not recommend this for approval as an A&R.
I make a motion that we do not recommend this
Okay,
for
it's been
approval as an
recommended.
A&R.
Endorse
The
this.
motion is
Okay,
that
it's been
we
recommended.
not recommend this for
The motion
endorsement
is
as an
that
ANR.
we
Could I have a
not
second, please?
recommend this for
Second.
endorsement
Been
as an
moved and
A&R.
seconded. Could I have a second, please?
Now,
Second.
Discussion on
Been
this
moved
plan,
and seconded.
please. Is there
Now,
any, discussion on this plan, please. Is there any? Yes, Doug.
So I don't understand how,
Yes, Doug.
so I don't understand how.
Okay, I'll speak louder.
So I don't understand how this could be approved
Okay,
either
speak
with
louder.
the dirt
So
road. I don't understand how this could be approved
Exactly.
either with the dirt road.
I'm sorry, folks, we have the microphones that we have. I'm sorry, folks, we have the microphones that we have.
Hold on, the microphones are the television, these, for the people at home,
Hold
I
on.
don't think
The
you.
microphones are the
television, for the people.
At the narrowest is about 9 feet across, at the widest is about 12 feet across. Some dirt that's high centered, and when I walked it, it appeared that there had been a truck that had gotten stuck in the sand. There are no public amenities to it, like electricity, water, that sort of thing, so I don't see how we can recommend this as, as an A&R. Any other comments? Yes, Ralph?
Does the staff have any questions or comments?
No, sir, I have no
Okay, are you ready to vote? All in favor of the negative motion?
Aye.
Opposed, abstain. Thank you.
Okay.
And we move on to our continued public hearing. Applicant Nathan Ellis Highway LLC. Special permit to use a, folks, you really do have to be quiet. This is quite a large room, even if we do have the PA system turned up. Special permit to use a portion of the property located at 210 Nathan S. Ellis Highway for a waste disposal contractor, WDC. J.E. Landers Colley is the engineer of record. And as you remember, we had given a list of necessary tasks that had to be done by the applicant for the benefit of the board to be able to make a decision, and also for the fire department and the engineering department to make their recommendations. And I'd like to go to Mr. Curry, excuse me, to give us the recommendations.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, the applicant is first without response.
Okay. Jeff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to make sure this is on. Can everyone hear me? Who cannot hear me?
Everybody.
Okay. For the record, my name is Jeff Oppenheim. I'm an attorney here in Falmouth. practice in the law firm of Oppenheim and Nickerson. I'm joined this evening by my client, Carl Cavosa, who's sitting right here. He's manager of the Nathan Ellis Highway LLC, and he's the owner of the Cavosa Excavating Company and Cavosa Disposal Company. Kim McIntyre, his office manager, is sitting in the row right here in the front and center, and next to Kim is Jack Landers-Cawley, who is our civil and environmental engineer. The board opened this hearing on April 7th, continued it to the 21st. There was a further continuance until April 28th, and at that time, the board continued the hearing to this evening. I want to express my appreciation to the planning staff for identifying through a memo dated April 24th the exact items that were required by the planning board and by the staff. And we have endeavored to try to answer all the questions raised by the staff in a filing that was made last Thursday, May 7th. I know there's been a lot of testimony already by both us as the applicant and by members of the community. And I appreciate all of your patience in allowing us to continue to fully present our proposal and to understand that there is vocal opposition to at least part of our request for special permit. And we just simply ask what we think is your obligation, which is to keep an open mind until all the information has been presented and you close the hearing. And of course that applies not only to what I'm going to say, but to what members of our community are going to say. You are the impartial fact finder. As an attorney, we would look to you as we would look to a judge or a jury, and these decisions should not be based on emotion, number of people here to speak against it, or to speak in favor of it. Based on the correspondence that has been, some of the correspondence, which is in your files, there is some confusion in our community about our proposal. And part of what I hope to do this evening is for your benefit, and certainly for the people who have come out this evening, to try to clarify certain things. One thing I want to emphasize is that there will be no garbage composting on this site. We're not requesting that. We never have requested that. Our request is a proposal to compost food waste. The board knows. The board understands that under the mass regulations, that definitions in this area are very technical. And garbage comes in all different sizes and shapes and forms, according to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And the definitions that we're all obligated to follow this evening and in your decision are under 310 CMR Section 16. And I want to thank you in advance for your careful analysis based on those definitions. Before I get into my presentation, I made a request in writing on April 27th of the board to consider a special meeting prior to next week's town meeting. And I'd like to explain my request to the board, and then I would like you to act on my request. The reason I requested a special meeting between now and the 19th is that two of our board members who have been sitting dutifully on this hearing, Mr. Leary and Mr. Brown, are up for election. And we would like, obviously, since we've gone through this whole process, for both Mr. Brown and Mr. Leary to be able to sit and decide the petitioner's application. We need to have 5 votes. We have presently, because Mr. Dreyer was off one evening, we have 6 potential people voting. So I would like to ask the board if they would vote to hold a special meeting sometime between now and prior to the election, so that you would be in a position to make a decision on my client's application. And I think he could be materially disadvantaged after the election by simply having to get 5 out of 5 votes, and perhaps we might not even have 5 of the sitting board members available to vote on the evening that you want to vote. Someone could be ill, etc., and then we wouldn't have enough people. I'm making this request, obviously, respectfully. I know it would be an inconvenience to you. I know you're not, used to sitting more than once a week. I understand that. But given the situation and the interest of the community, and certainly the interest of my client, we would like to have that opportunity.
You wanted us to decide right now?
I would.
Right. I don't know of any available time that we could do between now and then for any surety. I know people's schedules are different. I am disinclined to do that, and for another reason as well. I believe that the deliberations will most likely take more than one evening. This is a complex issue. So I am disinclined to do it. I don't know about the other board members.
Well, I can state right now, I'm not available until next Tuesday.
Okay. That's what I was concerned about, that there would be an unavailability of board members. So I think we're not going further with this one then, because that would decrease it by 1 more, because Ken is not available until then.
Thank
Okay.
you for considering. I'm going to move on to the questions identified by staff in the memo to us dated April 24th, 2015. We were asked to prepare an existing condition plan, and we did that. It's this plan. It's in your file, certified by and stamped by both Jack Landers Cawley and also by Gary LeBrie. Okay, this is nothing that is really new to the board, but if you requested it, it's in your file. I can answer any questions you may have later about it, and if I can't answer the questions, certainly our engineer can. You also asked us to prepare a existing conditions plan. Excuse me, a proposed use plan. And that is this plan here. I'd like to point out a few things to the board. Are you able to see? Oh, you have it in front of you? Okay. I'll try to point. The heavy dark lines represent around the periphery of the property, represent undisturbed areas that we are not going to disturb. So they run around the perimeter, the back, the front. There's a large berm in the front, and also along the back here of the easement as well. We have a windrow plan, which I'll discuss in more detail later. Shows the location of the windrows, the location of the road next to the windrows, and a profile of how the windrow will be constructed on sandy loam with the windrows built on top. There'll be more about that as well. You have a small road detail plan as well, which was prepared by Jack. If there's any questions about that plan, Jack will be able to discuss them with you or answer any questions you may have. So in your memo to me, you asked me to explain the internal driveway locations and the changes in the access between the two plans. So if you have the proposed plan in front of you, which is this plan right here, you'll see the access road that runs alongside of the proposed composting area. You'll also see a short road that leads towards the property line, which is we've added for fire access, and there'll be more on that later. The road goes up on top of the easement area, which is the way that we will access the top of this pile of sandy loam, and where we will and how we will build the windrows. Okay, that's this area right here. Now that area is detailed here. Okay. You asked about the boulders. The boulders are in this area here. Okay, and any boulders that we own that are not on this property will be moved onto the property. Some of these boulders came from the easement when we were doing work out there, helping them build a road, etc. So actually some of those boulders are not really owned by us. They're owned by the utility company that was doing work out there. You probably are aware that they've been doing major utility work throughout Falmouth. The boulders themselves are surplus excavation material and are piled up for storage. They're used on projects, and they're for sale to seawall contractors. The boulders are located as shown in the proposed usage plan, and they're not part of any retaining wall on the site and will not be used to create any retaining wall in the proposed usage plan. Again, I direct your attention to the proposed access road plan, which is very detailed, which has been gone over by the town engineer, and our engineer is here if you have any questions. The next area that you inquired about was drainage. You asked us to show the impervious and pervious areas and lot coverage calculated on a plan prepared by a professional engineer. This plan shows where the pavement is, and there is a line that runs approximately here, and this part of the site is primarily paved, and this part of the site is not paved, pervious surface. This part of the site has drainage structures in it, which you can see in detail on the plan. There's several of them. And there's also arrows that show the flow of the water, both on the pervious side and on the impervious side. On the impervious side, most of the water that hits the ground is absorbed. It's pervious. It's sandy soils. If we have very, very heavy rains, the arrows would indicate the flow of water to a swale, and from the swale to this detention pond over here. You'll see in a moment from the windrow plan that the drainage in that area will be retained on the compost pile. And I'll explain that to you in a minute. So we've provided drainage calculations, again, to the engineer, and Jack is here if there's any questions, specific questions on that. We retained Dr. Jonathan Blount who's an environmental scientist, and he submitted a letter to the Board of Health with a copy to you. And he was the gentleman who suggested the site of the test well to be here, okay, right there in the corner of our property. That's because that's the way the groundwater would flow if there's any leachate coming off this 11-foot high pile of sandy loam. And the doctor said it is his opinion that the proposed composting activities are unlikely to impact the local groundwater in any meaningful way. But he did include a testing protocol so that we could prove him correct, essentially. And that protocol, if you grant us a special permit for this activity, I believe would be a protocol that would be reviewed and approved and or tweaked by the Board of Health. I'd like to move next to fire suppression. So the question was asked, provide alternative water supply options for fire suppression in addition to the 75-gallon per minute well referenced. This site is serviced by a private well. The town of Falmouth does not have water in front of this property. And that becomes very important when it comes to discussing what our fire department would like us to do. How would we suppress a fire anywhere on this site? There's two hydrants, one on Cloverfield Road and one on Falmouth Woods Road. Both of them are basically equidistant from the compost pile at 930 feet. The fire department would likely need a pumper truck to provide the necessary pressure. I'm not sure of that, but that's sort of secondhand information. Each truck in our fire department carries 1,200, minimum 1,200 feet of hose. So if there was a fire at this compost pile, we believe the fire department would have no problem putting the fire out. Keep in mind that food waste compost is 75% water. And in order to have the right climate for composting, the compost has to be damp. Please also keep in mind that compost starts to change organically from the minute it goes into the windrow and is mixed with other materials. So at the end of the composting process, we're not dealing really with compost, we're dealing more with dirt. 90 days into the process. It's an evolution, obviously. And that affects, or would affect, what sort of a fire, if there would be a fire. There's been some heightened concern in Falmouth recently about fires in composting areas. And I suspect that's why the fire department wrote the letter they wrote to you. We had a fire in a compost area where stumps had been buried. It's a very challenging fire to fight. We had a fire in our own composting area. Leaves. Allegedly, there was, open flame. There was a cigarette or something that caught the leaves on fire. I don't have the details on that. Keep in mind, a fire on a compost pile is not a life and safety issue. Okay? The firefighters are not going to race into the middle of our compost pile to put it out. There's no need to do that. It's like putting out soil if it's on fire. And by the way, it's sitting on 11 or 12 feet of soil. The other thing that we bring to the fire suppression business is heavy equipment. That's what my client does. And my client frequently or occasionally gets called to a fire because he has these equipment to help our fire department. So he has the equipment on site. They'll keep the equipment on site. He can smother the fire with all the sand and other material he has on the site. Or alternatively, he can expose the fire with the heavy equipment that he has. Next question you asked was, does the height of the loom pile fluctuate? If so, certify the maximum height requested to be allowed. The answer to the question is yes, the loom pile fluctuates. It's based on demand. It's based on seasonality. The loom pile is the biggest early spring because the material has been processed and is being processed because the heavy demand is in the springtime. The maximum height of the loom pile is at an elevation of 123 feet. You'll see that on the plan, the windrow plan. So we're putting the windrows on top of a loom pile that's 123 feet above sea level. Okay, not 123 feet in the air, 123 feet above sea level. Understand that maintaining a loom pile on the site is a by right use. Okay, what we're asking for is to put food compost windrows on top of our loom pile. That comes within your jurisdiction. Okay, we have been creating loom at the site for 20 years since we've been there. We're general site contractors. That's one of the things we do. The windrows on top of the compost, on top of the loom pile, will not exceed 8 feet in height. You'll see that also on the windrow plan. You also asked, what is the distance between the boulders that are up here and the access to the top of the loom pile, essentially the entrance to the proposed food composting area. And the distance is exactly 64.7 feet. You asked what equipment will be on site at all times for firefighting. And we said that at all times there'll be a front-end loader and an excavator to assist in firefighting operations. You do understand, because I know you know this site, and you've been involved in this site for almost 20 years, that this is an active site. We have a yard manager. We have a gentleman whose job it is 8 hours a day to manage this site, take care of the soils, and if you allow it, he'll be the one who's primarily responsible for monitoring the windrows and turning the windrows over. Okay, so this is a very closely monitored site, and it's taken care of. So yesterday, you received a letter from our fire department, and the letter had 4 points. And one point was they wanted to have access on 4 sides of this compost pile. Now that's after verbally telling us 2 sides would be okay. Well, we provided 3 sides, and now formally, after they've reviewed the plan that was submitted last week, they've asked for 4 sides. We're providing them with 14-foot wide access on the plan. They're requesting 18 feet. There's nothing in any code that I've been able to find in the last 24 hours that says that you have to agree with the fire department. Just because they're asking for it doesn't mean they need it. And furthermore, it doesn't mean it has anything to do with our state fire code. They also required a fire hydrant at the site. Well, how are we going to do that? We don't have town water in front of our property. There's a gap between our neighbors in Ballymead and to basically the other side of the highway. I'm not sure why they would ask for that. Is that because they don't want to run their lines at 930 feet? They've allowed us to build a garage. They've allowed us to build an office without the need for a hydrant. Now they're asking for a hydrant. It's not reasonable, and you shouldn't find it reasonable. It would be a substantial burden to require it financially, to run a water line several hundred feet. And it would have to be connected, we're told, to the Ballymead line, because they don't want a dead end. Even though they have a dead end existing, they would not want us to create a dead end in front of our property. So we rely right now on 2 fire hydrants, one on Cloverfield Road and one on Falmouth Woods Road. They also asked about our equipment that we have at the site. I've already answered that. We have more than ample equipment. They asked about storage of other compostable materials on site. It was an interesting question because we've told the board on the plans and in writing all the compostable materials that are on the site. I mean, the fire department knows that we have fuel there. The fire department knows that we have lubricants there. The fire department can look and see that we have wood chips as part of our materials that we need on the site and materials that we would need on the site to be composting. So we're a little bit miffed by the fire department's referral to you for the reasons stated. If there was a fire in the site, we're going to be fighting a fire on top of an 11-foot high pile of dirt, sandy soil. Okay, and we're going to be able to smother the fire with the other soils that are shown in your plan. My colleague, Attorney Perry, pointed out at one of our hearings how much rain we get on Cape Cod. And he said we have more rain here than we get in Seattle. It's a little bit of a surprise to me, but you know, I believe him, and that means that, you know, we're not going to have a situation where we have dry conditions. We're not going to allow it because we want our pile to have adequate moisture, and we're going to be measuring that every day. You asked about our trash trucks. How many trash trucks are we going to have on the site? We're requesting a total of 15 trash trucks. 10 of these front-end load trash trucks. And I showed you pictures at one of the other hearings. I can show them again if you need to refresh your memory. And 5 trucks that load from the back. That's what we're requesting. It's not what we have now. We told you what we have in a prior communication. We're asking for a few more. You asked us to certify the maximum number of vehicles, trucks, equipment requested to be shared. Okay, because I testified that some of these vehicles are shared, and you asked us to provide a breakdown. We responded by saying that we want to have 11 shared vehicles. Okay, shared with whom? Shared with the excavating company. 8 roll-off trucks, 2 swap load trucks, and 1 forklift. So those are shared vehicles. You asked us to show the dimensions on a plan for the storage, for the truck storage, and to certify the maximum number of feet to be used for equipment truck parking. And that's on this plan, and it's located right here. The area that's shown is 175 feet long by 30 feet deep, and it's been labeled special permit for disposal truck parking. This area will be a dedicated area, if you allow it, for waste disposal contractor trucks. Now there's 2 other areas marked truck parking. One is 82 by 58, and the other one is 82 by 25. And they're right here, these two areas here. Now, those are areas that will be that are sometimes shared, but are more often used by the excavation company. And they would be parking excavation vehicles by right. But sometimes there's disposal vehicles in that area, so we're considering them shared. Describe the types of on-site truck equipment servicing requested to be allowed on site. Long paragraph there. I'm not going to go through it all. I will say to you that we're requesting permission to do everything from changing wiper blades to doing work on truck engines. If you look at that list, and pretty much everything in between. And again, if you have any questions about that, I'll be happy to try to answer them or have my client answer them. We also asked for the right to service the dumpsters that we own. They need occasionally to be welded. They take some abuse, and they also need to be painted occasionally. You requested that we certify the maximum number of empty disposal containers requested to be allowed on site. And I want to refresh you that we don't make money with disposal containers sitting on our site. We make money when they're at a business location or in someone's front yard who's doing construction work. But there are times of year when the use of some of the dumpsters in our community goes down, and that's in the winter. Or the use changes. Maybe they had a 10-yard and they go down to a 6-yard because the restaurant is not so busy in the winter. And my client's swapping the larger one for the smaller one and bringing the smaller one back to the yard. So it's, again, it's a dynamic situation. It's hard to predict on any given day. But it's the winter months where we most likely will have a larger volume of empty dumpsters in our yard for those reasons. Again, I want to point out to you that these dumpsters are shared. They are sometimes used by the excavation company, and they're frequently used by the disposal company. And that's why we have labeled these two areas as shared dumpster areas. Because, you know, we don't know on any given day who's going to use what dumpster. And the excavation company's use of dumpsters, as you know by now, is a by right use because of the change in zoning. So by my calculations, we're using 23,198 square feet potentially for shared empty dumpster storage. These two areas on the plan at their maximum. And you might notice that there's a dotted line that's behind that empty dumpster storage area. Well, that's because, again, you know, there's times a year when that's going to be used for material and not for empty dumpsters. I showed you with overlays that, again, the dynamic nature of the site changes as the seasons change, as the demand changes. The next area of inquiry was about cardboard recycling, which is one of our special permit requests. You asked us what would be the maximum number of recycling removal trips to be permitted in a week. Our response was 10. What would be the maximum volume of material on the site at any given point? We responded with 60 tons. And as I previously have testified, 60 tons is the equivalent of 2 loads with our currently owned equipment, 100-yard trailer. So do we take 10 loads out a week now? No, we do not. But you asked us what would be the maximum number that we're requesting. If that increases, then we'd like to go up to 10. Next area of inquiry was about the composting area. So this is a detail of the composting area, obviously blown up. You asked us how many windrows. As you can see, there's 4 windrows on here. I'll give you a moment to find that plan. So we're asking for 4 windrows with 8 feet in between each windrow. So we can get equipment in there to move the windrow or flip the windrow. The maximum length of the windrow would be 180 feet, as you can see from the plan. It would be 8 feet high at its peak, and it would be approximately 12 feet at its base. You asked about the maximum tons of food waste requested to be permitted on site. And we answered by saying 242 tons at any given time. And we referred you to Exhibit A of my submittal, which is a discussion of how we calculate the tonnage. And I can go through that if you'd like, but I think it should be fairly clear from the presentation. Again, I'd like to emphasize that once food waste goes into a windrow, it starts to become something other than food waste. And probably after 30 days, it's not going to be recognizable, if not less, to any of us as food waste. It begins to compost. So the tonnage actually goes down over time because it's going from food waste to compost, soil. Maximum daily deliveries was the next question. 5 tons of food waste each day, and this is important that our community hears this because it may be new information to them, and we don't want misinformation on this because I know a lot of people are concerned. And we are saying that the maximum we're requesting is 5 tons of food waste each day. And to put it in maybe perhaps more manageable terms for all of us, because 5 tons is 10,000 pounds. Someone is standing in front of food waste, actually Charlie Sensacos. So if he were to step aside, we could see, or step off of the 48-gallon food waste toter, which might be a measure for you to think about, because I'll talk in terms of how many of those toters are we going to bring to the site. So 5 tons of food waste a day, members of the board, is 27 of those food toters. Each food toter, if filled to the top, is 48 gallons. That's a 48-gallon food toter. The DEP permit, which we obtained, and this is probably where the confusion has come in, allows for 30 tons a day. Okay? Again, we're requesting 5 tons, substantially less. We believe that the actual number of food toters that we will be bringing to the site is probably 20. And if our projections are correct, that would be 3.6 tons a day. So we're asking for the maximum of 25 tons of food waste each week, which is 135 of those food toters that Charlie is leaning up against per week. Again, the Department of Environmental Protection says that we would be allowed up to 105 tons per week. And we're still considered, if we were doing 105 tons, we're still considered a small composting operation at 105 tons. And we're asking this board for 5 tons. What's the maximum annual average? That was a question you asked. And our response is 13 tons of food waste per year maximum. Provide the conversion factor.
13 tons a year doesn't compute.
No. 1,300 tons.
Yeah, that's what we need.
That's what I said, I thought.
No.
I apologize.
Okay.
Okay, you asked what is the conversion factor? How do you calculate all this? Well, we use the EPA standard volume to weight conversion factor, and I provided you with the reference in one of my pieces of correspondence. One 55-gallon drum of food waste, according to our EPA, weighs 412 pounds. And our conversions are done using that information. You asked when would we anticipate the peak hours and the number of trips to the site to unload food waste. And our response was between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. in the morning. And how many average trips? And we said 3 trips per day to unload food waste. As regards the site plan, you asked us to delineate all areas necessary for the special permit activities, including previous permits, parking in the front yard, and the accessory apartment. So we have put that on this plan. So we have labeled, for instance, the shop area as shared use. Okay? We have labeled the office building as a shared use because both Caboose Excavating and Disposal Company use both those structures. We've already talked about the shared truck parking areas. Exclusive use areas will be where the waste disposal trucks park, which is in this area, are previously defined, and exclusively on top of the loom pile, the 11-foot high loom pile. The windrows are exclusive to the special permit. And we're asking, we're continuing our special permit to park in the within 50 feet of Nathan Ellis Highway. And that's designated here in the front yard by this black line. The board also asked us to provide dimensions or distances to the 10 nearest homes within the compost pile. We did that on this plan, which is part of the record, and we've labeled on the bottom the distance to the homes. The closest one is 23 Falmouth Woods Road, and the furthest one is 82 Cloverfield Way. We've also put stars on this map. This map is a map from our GIS service here in Falmouth. And it also shows, which I hope will be helpful, a red line, which is a quarter-mile circle around the site. The quarter-mile is measured from the boundary lines of our site. The blue line, which is a little harder to see, but I'll be leaving this with you, is a half mile. So it shows all the homes within a half mile. Some on this side of the highway, but none down here in Valleymead, other than the one that I mentioned, which is one of the 10 closest in this area here. So we believe we provided the information to the board that you requested on this issue. Again, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those. You requested that we demonstrate the applicability of any and all procedures and practices in accordance with 310 CMR 19207, which is the DEP regulations. And I wrote a response that essentially, according to 310 CMR, it does not apply the requirements of 207 because what we're requesting that you allow us to do, the cardboard is exempt under our DEP regulations, and the food waste composting is not considered solid waste as defined by the state's regulations. Solid waste is defined as useless, unwanted, or discarded solid, liquid, or contained gaseous material, I'm quoting, that is stored, treated, processed, or transferred pending such disposal, but does not include materials which are recycled, composted, or converted in compliance with 310 CMR 1603. Cardboard aggregation, commercial organic waste composting fall under exempt uses, members of the board. So complying with that section of the regulations would be in conflict with the regulations. So in reviewing and being part of these public hearings and reviewing the file, it's reasonably clear to me that of the 4 requests, one of them is obviously the most controversial to the neighbors that are here. And we hope that they've heard us on how much compost we're requesting this board, and that they will not fear that we are dumping inordinate amounts of food waste into windrows near their property. We have done calculations, we have submitted them. I will not take you through them unless it will be helpful to do that. Please keep in mind that a windrow is made up of 25% food waste when it is constructed, and 75% is not food waste. It's brown waste, it's grass clippings, etc. And we do that in order to enhance the composting process. That's the way it's done. I should add that we have been composting at this site for 20 years. We are very experienced in composting. We haven't been composting food waste at the site for 20 years, but we've been composting organic materials at the site. Now, there was some concern raised by my colleague, Attorney Perry, at the last hearing when you took information. What was the, whether we were having too great a concentration of food waste. Again, I'm not going to take you through all the calculations, but we are operating this facility, represented here, on 1/3 of an acre of our 8.36 acre site. 1/3 of an acre. And taking the most conservative interpretation of the guidelines, the bylaw, the regulations, we would be allowed to have 1,655 cubic yards. And we're proposing 1,280 cubic yards in a 1/3 acre area. Another concern raised is the odor. And much has been written by the opponents about the odor. And you were the recipients of some scholarly papers. One of them commissioned by the Department of Ecology of the state of Washington, which was written by researchers at the University of Washington. And it's interesting reading. But you need to understand that that paper was written for large food waste composters. You also need to understand that in the city of Seattle, as of January 1, 2015, every household must compost food waste. They must do it. Otherwise, they're going to be in violation of a regulation in the city of Seattle. Seattle is way out ahead, I think, of most states. They have more composting facilities in Seattle than they have in all of California. And they're priding themselves on trying to take this food waste out of the landfills, out of our waste stream. And there's all kinds of good environmental reasons for that. We don't have to debate that. I don't think it's really debatable. I think it's established. Really, the question becomes not on Route 151, not on my client's property, because it may have a potential negative impact. We don't believe it will. Okay, we believe that we can control the odors, and we believe that the size of the operation it doesn't compare to any of these studies. We're talking about the recycling efforts of food compost in Seattle, in San Francisco, in Philadelphia, and Rikers Island, just to name a few. These are the areas where food waste composting has caused major problems. We're not in a metropolitan area. We're not doing it on that sort of a commercial scale. The summary in that study that I've just quoted from Washington says, it starts on the executive summary page, managing residual organics in cities has been a major sustainable challenge of every historical civilization with negative impacts. Obviously, I've emphasized cities. It hasn't been a problem in rural areas. We've been composting in Falmouth since there was a Falmouth. I mean, this was an agrarian area. We had animals, we had agricultural waste. This is not something new to our community. We were the strawberry capital of our country. You think that was all sold? Everything was sold? Didn't happen. It's estimated that 1 million tons of food is landfilled in Washington state annually. And that contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. I would like to just point out to you at this point that there's this big arrow here on this plan. What does that arrow represent? What's it represent? That represents true north. The compass rose right in that corner. This represents 24 degrees off the compass road, and this represents 30 degrees off the compass road. Here's some information. I don't expect you to study it now. This information is taken from NOAA. It is prevailing winds measured in Boston at the airport. the front page is a summary of 5 years of data. It's interesting. If you look at the chart, and I've highlighted each page to show you where the information is provided by NOAA. The prevailing winds in June and July and August, our hottest months, are at 24 degrees. Okay? That's 24 is 24 degrees. 24 degrees is that pin on the map. 30 is the second pin. Now, other than June, July, and August, if you look at the summary, it's primarily at 30 degrees. It's almost uncanny how predictable the winds are. So why do I give you this information? Why do I give it to our community? Because that's what the prevailing winds are. Okay, the winds are blowing into towards the Mass Military Reservation. This is also by way of, I hope, some assurance and reassurance. We did the same on this map. We're up here. That star is us. This star is the nearest home in Ballymead. Nearest home to our operation, the other side of the golf course. Again, this is true north. This is 24, this is 30 degrees. And you can check it, to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting it for your staff can. This is the closest home to this facility down here. That's our sewage treatment plant. So our friends and neighbors in Ballymead are that distance from the sewage treatment plant, and have been. So what does this mean? I think what this means is that if they're not troubled by any adverse effects from our sewage treatment plant, which is here, I mean, whatever's in the air is dissipating over this distance. This is our former landfill. Again, this very nice community, of which my client is a resident, by the way, is not far from our former waste disposal site. And it's not far from our town composting site here, and it's not far from all of this activity on Thomas Landers Road, where our town has permitted, through its zoning, a lot of contractor uses. I think this is helpful to understand the scale of what we're looking at. And I hope everyone in the room will find it helpful. I thank you for your attention. Before we yield to questions and comments, I'd like to invite my client, Carl Cavosa, to address the board briefly.
Thank you. My name is Carl Cavosa. I'm the applicant. This time I get to speak with Jeff's permission, unlike last time. When I first proposed this to the board, I had no idea that there'd be more than 3 or 4 people in this room when this board talked about this. Had I known that, I certainly would have done a few things a little differently. Maybe some education, maybe some flyers, maybe meet with people. I did meet with all my abutters. I gained the support of all my abutters. Some of the letters are in the record there from my largest abutter, CLSV, my 2 other abutters. I had no idea that any of my neighbors over a mile, some of them 2 miles away, would come out and be concerned about this because of the activity that's been on the site in the past 20 years. I've never received a foul word from anyone about traffic, odor, noise, and I certainly didn't want to upset my neighbors. Some of what's happened with these petitions and whatnot has created some real tough feelings and some hard feelings and some sour feelings. And I feel like I'm responsible for that in a way, but through maybe assuming that it wasn't going to be an issue. I apologize for that. That being said, the amount of food waste composting that we're proposing to do on the site with 5 tons is 1 loader bucket full a day. 1 loader bucket full. Not 105 tons or 30 tons like the petition says. When I saw the petition, I wanted to sign it. I've been a good neighbor. I've been a good community citizen. I've done good business in my community. If we have papers or trash that come out of trucks, or not even out of trucks, we go out on 151, we clean it up. I'm proud of my site. I've won the beautification award several times in a row. I work on the site every day, 6 days a week. If you know my trucks and you know my yard and the equipment we run, there's going to be no odor or ill effects with my neighbors. It's not the way I run my business. It's not the way I want to be recognized in my community. And it's not the way my customers want me to run my business, or my banker, or my lawyer, or my wife, or my friends. A lot of my closest friends are my neighbors. So the idea that I would do something to ill affect their property values, their homes, their lives, their families is absolutely absurd. Composting is here. It's not going to go anywhere. I think this site is a perfect site to compost on the limited basis that we've projected and that we've put forward here. There are other composting areas in town that are working successfully in our community that have had no odor complaints. I think this will be another one, with your permission. If this doesn't happen on this site, I worry that composting won't happen in our community. There are not very many sites, including our own leaf composting facility, which is much closer to a lot of these folks' homes, and it's also upwind or downwind of their homes. Their homes would be downwind of that facility. So if it was mismanaged, like it's being now, that's why there's a fire there, then there would be problems. A properly managed compost facility in small operation has odor at the pile. Just like when your dog goes to the bathroom in your front yard. It smells at the pile. Doesn't smell when you go to your front steps. 20 or 30 feet away from the pile, 50 feet away from the pile, the compost pile doesn't smell. One thing that my attorney Jeff did say was the tonnage, the amount of tonnage on the site at any one time of food waste is 240 some odd tons. And it's basically a calculation over 90 days how much food waste we would have taken in. And that number is a large number, and it sounds like a lot, but at a very short period of time, within 30 days, it's no longer food waste. The DEP doesn't consider it food waste. We don't consider it food waste at that point. We can actually screen it, and 50 to 60% of it is dirt. It's already compost. We don't do that. We let the compost rest, and we let it cure the entire 90 days. But if you go through the piles, that's what you'll see. So when you say there's that much food waste in the piles at any one time, that's what we've brought in over that period of time, but it's no longer food waste. You know, to say it's food waste at 89 days is ridiculous, because on the 90th day it's now compost and we're going to screen it. So at a certain point it's no longer compost. If this operation, as predicted by my neighbors, smells and is odorous and is in failure, I've talked about this with Jeff and my colleagues, my team. There's 320 cubic yards in each windrow. That's 10 truckloads, 10 tractor trailer loads. We could remove the 320 cubic yards in 8 hours. So if the most recent pile had an issue and there was a problem, there was an odor problem, and it needed to be removed, it's not like the turbine that's been associated with, it would be removed in 8 hours. That's not an issue. So the food waste is not a permanent structure that would sit on the site. If this doesn't work, I'm not going to continue doing it. I don't want my neighbors upset with me. I want them to be able to celebrate something that I think is worthwhile. It's recycling, taking materials out of the waste stream that we've been doing for several years in the site, turn it into a usable product. And if it works and it's successful, then it's something our community is going to be able to do in different areas with a business model that works. The good part about this program, unlike a lot of the programs that were represented by the other attorney, is, and I visited the Peninsula Project. The Peninsula Project had an investment of almost $30 million in Delaware. I went down there, met with the engineers when the site was being built, met with the owners, toured the facility, met the dog that they used for seagull control, which was very interesting. It was the first time I've ever seen that. Their business model was based on food waste in. All their revenue was derived from the food waste coming into the facility, not the material leaving the facility. The sole purpose of the facility was to make money bringing food waste into the facility. All they cared about was the scale and bringing food waste into the facility. They didn't mix the food waste with wood chips. They brought in demolition debris, wood demolition, which they got paid to take, mixed with cardboard, mixed with sheetrock, and unfortunately, the Peninsula Project failed miserably. And when I went down there, I voiced my concerns with the Peninsula Project folks about their end product. What was the goal for the end product? They didn't want to talk about the end product. Did they have an account with Scott's Fertilizer? Did they have a potting soil? Were they going to bag it? Were they going to sell it? They had no idea what they were going to do with it. They piled it up across the street, similar to what they do in Nantucket. And there's huge mountains of compost. That's where a lot of the odor comes from, because once the compost sits, it becomes anaerobic. It starts to rot again from the inside. And that's where a lot of the odors would come from. That Peninsula Project has subsequently shut down. Composting is not going to be a financial piece of my business. Both of my businesses that operate on that facility are very financially viable. I know a lot of you folks know who I am. You see the equipment around town, the dumpsters. We're very successful. We've done a great job over the past few years. This part of our operation is an experimental operation that we want to see if it works. If it's viable and it can be done, we'd like to do it on a large scale in a different area. But it has to work, and we think this works. What we're doing with the community here in this scale is hopefully not even going to be 1/10 of what we're going to have to do in a different property somewhere else, not in Falmouth, thankfully. But it will have the same effects, and we want to show a business model that works. So my business is not subject to making this work. So I don't have to worry about how much fuel the load is burning turning piles, or how much labor we're putting into turning the piles. It's very important for us to make this work, irregardless of the financial aspect. The last thing I want to say is that I'm welcome to any condition the planning board would put on the compost operation as far as odor control, odor modification, odor identification with Ollie, our zoning enforcement officer, or the Board of Health, or the Ladder Corps, coming out to the site and recognizing any odors. I take that willingly, and would love to actually see some sort of condition, if this board so sees, to grant us a permit. Thank you.
Okay. Brian? Yep. Okay, Jeff presented the fire department. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. It's allergy season. Thank you, Jim. Jeff presented the fire department referral. Was that completely covered by Jeff's presentation? Okay. Engineering department referral.
There's a referral in your file from the engineer. There's a referral in your file from the engineer, the town engineer. The main point he brings forward, Madam Chairman, is some extra detail on erosion control. The rest is regards to the drainage calculations. But this, you can review it. There's nothing earth shattering in it.
Okay.
There are people out in the hall and you can't hear anything back here.
I'm very sorry about the people. I am very sorry about the people in the hall, but there is a capacity to this room.
Hold it, folks. If this meeting doesn't work, we're going to cancel it right now, okay? No, you need to listen.
Hey, Jim.
Empty chairs down here.
But we are going on to questions from the board about the presentation currently. Some of you can probably move over a little bit. There are some chairs up here. There are 4 or 5 chairs up here. I can't help it. We moved it to this venue so that it could accommodate many more people than the room in Town Hall could.
There's 6 chairs up here. For anyone that can't hear, please come forward.
There's going to be one more. Okay, now I don't know, is everybody in from the hallway now? With that, thank you. We're going to move on to questions from the board in regard to this report tonight. We're limiting it to this report tonight. Does the board? Yes. Oh.
Just a point for the board members. These microphones here are for the PA system. These are for the television.
It's not doing any good then.
So if you need to pick up the microphone, that way the people will be able to hear you in the back and in the hall.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We didn't know this.
Someone whispered that in my ear, I think.
Okay.
Madam Chair, was there a question regarding erosion control?
The engineering department evidently has something in their referral regarding erosion control. So,
would you like us to address the question?
There's just a simple added detail that the engineer required for particular erosion control on the slopes of the windrows. Something that your engineer and our engineer can discuss.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
And we will comply with what the town engineer wants if you grant us a special permit.
okay. Now, folks, we are moving on to any questions that our board members might have in regard to the presentation tonight.
I have one question about the windrows. Just a clarification. I see on the plan it says 12-foot base, 11 to 12 foot. Is that 11 to 12 foot high of dirt, soil, whatever that is, and then the 8 or 9 feet of composting is on top of that?
So the base is of this triangle would be 12 feet on this cross section, and the maximum height would be 8 feet.
So that particular windrow is not going to be any more than 8 feet high.
Right.
That's including. Okay, thank you. That clarifies.
I'll continue with my question on that then. That's 12 feet of loam. Presumably you use that loam currently in the business. How is this going to happen in while the composting is going on top of it? How do you take loam out to continue to use it in the business?
Would you like to explain that?
Let me get my bearings here. Madam Chair, this whole plateau is loam. In the springtime, these piles will be started from this end. And what we do is we rotate the piles. So in 90 days, we should be down the end of a pile. So now we can mine out this windrow of compost and the 11 feet of loam that's underneath it. The whole idea of the compost is to mix the compost with the loam, and we'll do that in the screening process. So we'll mine this out from the bottom, put it into a screening plant that, if you see on our existing conditions plan, is right next to the loam pile, and then the screened loam is over here in this area here. So it'll go through the screening plant. There's a mixing process, a tumbling. It'll go up a conveyor and get dumped into what we have as a finished product, screened loam.
Well, I have a question about the firefighting capability. You pointed out that the hydrants are 930 feet away, but what type of terrain would the fire department have to traverse from Cloverfield Way, for one? And also, is it practical to expect them to cross the state highway with the line? And is it... I know there's a negative referral, so I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
I mean, in the odd chance that there is a fire that we cannot put out by ourselves quickly with the equipment that we have on the site, they may have to run a line across the state highway. But they wouldn't absolutely have to, because they can run a line from Cloverfield. So Cloverfield Way ends basically in a dead end, and on the other, through the dead end, through the woods, is the railroad easement, and on the other side of the railroad easement is this property. So it's not far. I mean, it's really not that far, especially if you're running, most of the line is run on the street. The last couple hundred feet would be run through the woods.
Excuse us.
Quiet back there.
The fire department is trained to fight fires in all kinds of situations, certainly in the woods, and we have lots of woods here. We're not, I don't think, asking them to do anything beyond their capacity or their ability or their training.
So would that involve crossing a train track there, and would that ever be...
The train track is not active, as you know, because it was servicing a transfer station which is no longer active on the base. But yes, there is a train track. It's easier to see here. This line here on the plan is the train track running into the Mass Military Reservation. And this is the end of Cloverfield Way here. The last home is right here. So this driveway at least will be here. And this is where the compost pile is. That's a little easier to visualize that.
Okay.
Other questions here from the board? Paul, have anything? You need this.
I'm just curious why the base of the windrows has to be up 11 feet from the property. What determines that particular elevation?
You mean, could it be 10 or could it be 12 or why any elevation at all?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll let my client ask that.
Paul, it's a great question, and there's two reasons. The first reason is, in every composting operation, you're going to have some sort of leachate. There's going to be liquid that comes off the pile. Not only when you dump the initial load of food waste, it is 70% liquid. So you need to contain that somehow. So what we did is we've copied some successful composting operations where they use the leachate in the compost during the process. So when you dump, the water stays on top of the loam pile, and the 10-foot separation from the original ground gives us ample filtering to the groundwater. So a lot of the nitrogen and the good stuff that we want in the compost and in the loam will stay in that material, make that material more valuable. And the bad stuff that we don't want in the groundwater will stay in the loam. So it acts like a 10-foot filter.
I have a follow-up, please.
Sure.
Did I understand you to say when you remove the windrows, you're removing a portion of this soil below, or all of
That's
it?
correct.
Or?
That's correct. Yes, and it's being obviously replaced. And Paul, this is a cycle. You know, composting is a cycle. There may be sometimes you come to the property and there's absolutely no compost. There's none. Other times you may come to the cycle to the property, and in November, December, January, February, March, there's quite a bit of compost, and that compost is getting ready to be, or may be ready to be screened. But we won't screen it until we know in the spring we have customers, we have projects that we can use the material on, then we'll screen the entire pile. So the operation, I don't want everybody to think, oh my God, we're gonna, you know, there may be a month where we say, okay, it's April, we've screened the entire loam pile. Tomorrow morning, the food waste won't come to the site. We'll divert the food waste to another location until we have enough loam on the site that we can spread out, make our pad, then we start bringing food waste on. So it'll be a cycle. So the pad will grow and it'll shrink as the screening process takes place.
Obviously, this is very seasonal, and it's very seasonal in terms of material you're adding to the waste stream. Leaves, for example, or wood chips. How does that affect you? Most of our food waste is going to be in the summertime, and most of the leaf recycle comes in the spring or the fall, particularly the fall. So you got to disincentive that.
The two things that I'm going to tell you is, in business, what you really want to do is you want to have a steady stream of revenue. And what we're trying to do is look to our food waste providers, food waste customers that have a steady stream of food waste. So when you think about the fluctuation in volumes, you know, the Flying Bridge, great customer of ours, very busy during the summer, closed during the winter. They're not going to be a food waste customer. They simply don't generate enough food waste to trigger the Department of Environmental Protection bylaw that they take the food waste out of the waste stream. So we're more away from that. Paul, when you think about right now, food waste customers will be places like the Olive Garden. The Olive Garden's a very year-round type restaurant. It's like the 99, very year-round type restaurant. Those would be more the typical place. Or the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard has a galley. They feed 25 people for breakfast, 100 people for dinner. That Coast Guard galley is a year-round place. That place would be something that would trigger the food waste. So that is more a year-round type of situation.
Thank you.
Ralph, do you have any comments or questions?
Yeah. Yes, you say there's loam underneath the food waste pile, but it's mixed with the loam. I thought there was a large requirement for leaves and wood chips and that kind of thing to be mixed in with that. I believe you need the carbon from that, is it? And so, therefore, like Paul said, you know, where are you going to get all your leaves and your wood chips and all that stuff to meet your max? I mean, granted, you want a steady flow, but where are you going to get that to cover the times when leaves and wood chips aren't normally available?
Well, right now, we have currently 1,500, 2,000 cubic yards of wood chips on the site. If you look on your plan, we take natural wood chips. We don't take demolition wood chips.
We take natural wood chips from N-Star, Tree Guys, that kind of stuff, and they pay us to dump there. So we have I don't want to say an infinite supply, but a very large quantity of wood chips. We also, during the spring and the fall, during the cutting seasons, have a large influx of leaves and grass clippings. I also partner with the town of Falmouth to help manage their compost area. Every once a year, we go down there, we screen. We're allowed to take so many hundreds of cubic yards of leaf material out of it as part of our payment.
Jan, do you have questions?
Nope.
Okay, anybody else on the board has further questions? Okay. Now we're going to move to the public. You've had 2 long nights of comments, and they've ranged over all of your concerns. Tonight, please limit your concerns to what was brought up new tonight. Limit your comments to that. Make them brief and to the point. And please come up here to the podium and state your name as before and where you live.
Mic right there, right?
Oh, all right. There's a mic right there. You can come up there. You don't have to come all the way up to the podium. Please, ma'am.
Hello, hi. My name is Vivian Almeida. I'm representing myself and my husband. May I approach to give you something?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. We are the closest residents from the site, from the 23 Falmouth Woods Road. We never received any communication from Cavossa's company. We just moved 3 months ago. That house right in the corner in front of the Bellamide doesn't belong to the Bellamide property. We are not a part of the community. We just bought that property, and that's just happened to be right in front of the Bellamide. And he just mentioned, the Cavossa's attorney, that the fire hydrant is very close to be able to eventually help with anything that happens. And that fire hydrant happens to be right in front of my house. My husband and I were very frustrated because we just knew this 3 weeks ago when we came from I think it was the second meeting already. And we found out about this whole project. And we were treated we're not important. Because even after the meeting, at that meeting that we're here, someone mentioned about our property. I thought that we would have any communication to us or anything that we would receive it. And until today, nobody even gave us the letter with the communication or anything. When in fact we are the closest house. After doing my research and find what that can happen, I found a lot of harmful situations, and that can affect my family. I have 2 little girls, and this can cause like respiratory problems and a lot of other problems that I saw on the sites. I'm not expert on this project. I don't know for true what that is real or not, but I have a family, and that's my precious. I don't want nothing to happen. We just moved to Falmouth. We thought that was so great, to be here, because it was a great neighborhood and everything. And we are very, frustrated with this whole situation because it's right in front of my house. If I open my back window, I can see the highway, and I can see his company. My problem is not with whatever he's doing. I have no problem. Everyone has to do their business. It's just where that's going to be, right where they have a lot of residential people. And we don't want that. It's not only because of the transportation, but the major thing is the odor that's going to cause.
So, I have to interrupt you because
Sure.
this has already been greatly spoken of as the odor. So your concern also is the fact that you were not notified
No, and the odor is right in my backyard anyhow.
and other
Yes.
possible aerosols. Thank you for your comment. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Sonia Sachs, and I've been hired by Ballymead and the Cloverfield and Falmouth Way residents to present. I have a PowerPoint presentation, if you would allow.
Do you have it printed?
I have printouts. I actually have a report that I prepared for them, so I can provide that report, and I can just talk from my PowerPoint slides.
Is there anything new that has not been presented before?
What I have been asked to present is on odor issues, on vector issues that I don't think has been covered, and other emissions that I think are of concern to the neighbors, like the bioaerosol emissions, and I'm not sure if that has been covered.
Actually, that has been brought up, and it was covered in the 3 reports that we were given by Attorney Perry.
Okay.
So that's been quite covered.
Assessment of the odor control, vector control, and contingency plan.
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
I was asked to evaluate the odor control plan, the vector control plan that was submitted to the planning board and to the Mass DEP that I don't think has been thoroughly reviewed, and that's what I would be speaking on.
Okay, then be please very brief, very concise about what you're presenting.
Okay. Do you mind if I go to the podium?
I do not mind.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And I can give you...
If you have a printout of your PowerPoint, I'd appreciate that for our file.
Yeah, I can provide that for you.
Okay.
I have an old copy, but this is the report, and I don't know if everybody else wants copies.
Are you going to show the PowerPoint?
We're not set up to do that.
It's only a matter of turning on the screen if that's...
More
Please.
information, better than less.
That's why I'm asking for a printout of it that we can see. Go ahead and take a copy. Yeah, Brian needs a copy too for the file.
So I'll try to be very brief on this. My name is Sonia Sachs. I'm an environmental scientist. I have about over 15 years of experience in the environmental field. My expertise is in exposure assessment, air dispersion modeling, and the evaluation of toxic air pollutants. My company is Gradient. We're an environmental consulting firm based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the expertise is in risk science and evaluation of contaminated sites and fate and transport of contaminants. So I was asked to focus on odor issues, bioaerosol emissions, and the issue of vectors at the site. Now, odors occur. I don't think it's disputed that there's going to be odors at the site from the decomposition of these materials. Now, the dispersion of these odors is really going to be dependent on the site location, which has been discussed, and also the meteorology. Now, I wish I could show you my windrows. They're quite different from the windrows that you've seen. They're in the report. And in the summertime, no question, the wind direction is in the direction that was shown to you. But in the spring and fall, you have a very different picture. You have wind directions that are coming from all different directions. So at any one time, you can have odor impacts to these neighboring communities. Now, there are best management practices that are out there. Best management practices are methods, they're techniques that are found to be the most effective and practical for achieving the objective. In this case, the objectives would be to minimize the odors and the impacts of the communities and minimize the vectors. There's a lot of elements that go into this. I will go through just a few of the very key ones since you asked me to be brief. So one of the elements is the feedstock. And what is the composition of the feedstock? There are ratios out there for the amount of carbon, the amount of nitrogen, and the optimal levels to achieve the balance that will avoid the maximum production of these odorous compounds, these anaerobic conditions. From the literature that I saw, the carbon nitrogen ratios, it was a very sort of back of the envelope, so many brown items to so many green items. This is a very imprecise way to calculate these ratios. There is a lot of information on the proper way to make sure that you have a proper ratio of carbon to nitrogen. If you have, for example, too little nitrogen, you're going to slow the process down. It's going to take a lot longer. If you have too much nitrogen, you get into areas with a lot of temperature, anaerobic conditions. This is where you start producing a lot of odor and a lot of problems. So it's really important to get that right ratio. Moisture, as we talked about, is very important. Low moisture slows the composting again. High moisture provides these anaerobic conditions that produce a lot of odor. As was mentioned, Falmouth gets a lot of rain, on average more than other areas in the U.S. So moisture control is going to be key. This squeeze test method where you go and you just squeeze the compost, this is what you might do in your backyard if you're composting. Best management practices really require a little more for this type of operation. You need more rigorous moisture control and specifics on, how often are you going to do it, where are you going to do it, how are you going to deal with a situation where you have too low, too high moisture. I did not see enough detail in the plans to say these are best management practices. These are, the controls that will achieve, the best optimal for the best composting and for the minimizing of odors, which I think is, one of the biggest concerns. So again, a simple squeeze test may not be sufficient. In terms of temperature is probably one of the key things. We talked about fire. These compost piles can get very, very hot. It's amazing when you think about how hot they can get. And this is where you start getting into issues of fires. They can get hot enough to create fire issues. But temperature is important for the composting process, for what microbes you're going to have, for how much activity you're going to have. So if you have if you have very elevated temperatures, you start getting into issues of odors. You have moisture losses, and that also creates problems with oxygen. So anaerobic conditions are very sensitive to moisture and temperature. Protocols really need to be in place for how the temperature is going to be taken at the pile. The temperature inside the pile is going to be very different from the temperature outside of the pile. So where are you going to take those temperatures? How often are you going to do it? Best management practices need to be in place. I did not see that. Just saying that you're going to take the temperature daily, I don't think is sufficient for best management practices. The configuration of the compost pile is also critical for maintaining temperature. This is an area to volume issue. You're going to be producing a lot of heat, but you're also going to have heat loss. So if you have a lot, you need the surface area, for the aeration, for the oxygen, but you also are going to have heat production and heat loss. You need to be able to maintain, and there are best management practices that dictate what the configuration of that compost pile should be. The typical, what I've seen in the literature is that the width should be double the height, and the plans that are set forth are not quite that configuration for this system. So temperature control may be an issue here. Also oxygen levels. So again, we've talked about how aeration, maintaining high oxygen, avoiding the anaerobic, the low oxygen conditions that are going to create odors is very critical. Again, I did not see anything about measuring oxygen levels in the piles in order to maintain the optimal levels. So that's important. pH. pH is another component that can affect releases of odors. High pH will increase the production of ammonia and the release of ammonia, whereas also in low pH conditions you might get increased hydrogen sulfide. That's the rotten egg smell that we all want to avoid. So I didn't see anything in the odor control plans about checking pH. So that's another key element of best management practices. How can this property be managed properly to avoid having nuisance issues to the neighbors that everyone's concerned about? I also looked at data on odor dispersion that indicated that under certain meteorological conditions, you have stable air systems, you have wind direction, you can have odor impacts up to some of the distances within the residential area. So it's in my report. It has been shown that odor can travel as far away as some of these residences, and that can achieve levels that are a nuisance to these residences. Again, I talked about meteorology. So bioaerosols. Due to the nature of composting, bioaerosols will include bacteria and fungi and other organisms. This has been a very active area of research. The health impacts are not very strong. There's no strong evidence that there's major health impacts. There have been respiratory impacts. A lot of the findings for respiratory impacts are actually for the workers involved in these operations. That's where you really see respiratory impacts. It's a little harder to define what these impacts are for residential areas. But that being said, studies have shown that there are elevated levels of fungi and bacteria, and if there are sensitive population groups, people that have asthma, people that have allergies, that are more than normally sensitive to some of these bacteria and fungi, you may see increased issues. So data shows that the bioaerosols will travel to distances within this residential community and at levels that could be problematic. Now, vector control is another potential issue. Vectors include flies and mosquitoes, rodents, feral cats and dogs. And best management practices, show that you need to ensure that these vectors are controlled because they carry pathogens, they carry illness, they can be a danger to pets. So the plan that I saw was had no monitoring or inspection plans, no detail on how the compost will be handled if there are pathogens. I think one concerning issue was that in order to ensure that you don't have pathogens, you need to maintain the compost pile at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time. In the plan, it was 3 days, when it really should be 15 days. So that indicates to me that I think more research needs to be done to really come up with a plan that's going to conform with best management practices. So pathogens are a big concern, and that needs to be addressed. So just in conclusion, I found that the odor and vector plans were not consistent with best management practices. There was no approach to really verify the carbon-nitrogen ratios, the moisture, the temperature, and there was no consideration of the bioaerosol emissions that might result, and how weather is going to be incorporated into the plans in order to minimize the impacts to the neighbors. Weather is important. When you are turning piles, you're going to increase emissions of both bioaerosols and odors. So it's important to consider, what is the wind direction? What is the wind speed? Are we in conditions that will maximize the dispersion of these contaminants to the neighbors when we're turning the piles? So those kinds of considerations are part of a best management practices approach, and that's about it. So I will.
Please, if you have questions, address them through the chair. That's just protocol in a hearing. Thank you.
What happens in the case of a hurricane or major storm?
In regard to wind, moisture, okay.
Dispersed all over town?
I mean, that has to be part of a contingency plan. And I did not see weather being part of a contingency plan. I think it's a very good point. I think this area certainly is very prone to these big major storm events, and I think a plan needs to be set forth to ensure that you don't get dispersal of either in the water. I obviously didn't talk about water issues, but water and air dispersal after the fact I think is important. Moisture control is going to be an issue when you have a lot of rain. So.
Thank you for your question. It was a very good one. Thank you. Anything? Yes, Matt.
Good evening, Matt McNamara. Quick comment on the presentation tonight. I hope the planning board takes more seriously the fire department referral than what was suggested. I'd like to bring to the board's attention two areas of the zoning bylaw that I think are critical for your decision making. One is under the new section 240-64D1, the acreage requirement. Under that new bylaw, a minimum lot area of 5 acres is required. Now, the planning staff has consistently recommended under similar circumstances that area already used on a lot can't be counted twice, and for good reason, because if the lot was already developed, if you need an additional 5 acres, can you be using the same 5-acre amount? Now, according to the recent submission to the file by Jack Landis-Collin, Mr. Gavosa's professional engineer, the site contains 8.3 acres, not the 8.63 that Mr. Oppenheim mentioned. But notwithstanding that possible error, the document goes on to state that the present conditions include 1.95 acre of used for paving and structures, 4 acres devoted to the current working yard area, and 0.25 acres of buffer to Route 151. Also, as was pointed out tonight, there's an easement, and previously there was also mention of a wildlife corridor. So I would suggest, differently than Mr. Oppenheim, that under 242.16, having less than 5 acres available renders the lot inadequate. Now, the other area I'd like to draw the board's attention to in the bylaw is 240.110. Now, the expert just before me used the word nuisance, and this is not a section of our bylaw that got a whole lot of attention until we were faced with the wind turbines. Now, the zoning bylaw clearly states that no use shall be permitted which would be offensive because of injurious or obnoxious noise, vibration, smoke, gas, fumes, odors, dust, or other objectionable features, or be hazardous to the community on account of fire or explosion or any other cause. No permit shall be granted for any use which would prove injurious to the safety or welfare of the neighborhood into which it proposes to go, and destructive of property values because of any excessive nuisance qualities. And I do take a bit of an objection with Mr. Oppenheim's comment that if there were a fire at this site, there would be no life or safety issue, because if in fact if the fire department is working on a stubborn fire at this site, it doesn't provide the safety that the rest of the community would expect. If in the wisdom of the board you choose to grant this special permit, I would like to suggest several conditions for you to think about. The first is that the special permit be granted to the applicant only, not to be transferable and not to go with the land. You simply might not feel as comfortable with the next owner as you do with Mr. Cavosa. 2, that the board conduct an administrative review every 6 months in order to modify the permit if necessary based on verifiable complaints. Number 3, that the applicant post a bond in the amount sufficient for the town to take any and all actions necessary to eliminate any and all nuisances created at the site as determined by the building commissioner or by the zoning board of appeals on appeal. 4, the applicant post a bond in the amount sufficient for the town to remove after 90 days of cessation of the permitted operation all trash, recyclables, and compostable materials from the site. 5, any changes to the permitted use, no matter how minor, shall require a modification of the special permit. Mr. Closer has not had the greatest track record of sticking to the conditions of prior special permits. Number 6, incorporate the conditions of the prior special permits, including but not limited to, and I'll give you a copy of this later.
Oh, thank you, Matt.
Including but not limited to maintenance of the berm, hours of operation, which in the last rendition of the special permit were 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Now, those hours were imposed by the planning board under the prior special permit, presumably because of its desire to protect the neighborhood. Now, with an even more intense use, there should be no erosion of that protection. Another condition would be the maximum number of vehicles and maximum pieces of equipment. I noted in the response to the file by Mr. Oppenheim that his list did not include the front end loader and the excavator that was listed for the fire department, so it would be important, I think, to have all of that equipment listed. The maximum number of dumpsters, although it's been listed, that was a condition under the prior special permit. Carry forward the safeguards for vehicle and equipment maintenance and repair, and also the protection of the wildlife corridor. And I think the 7th and final, although minimal in comparison, is there was nothing that I saw from the Zoning Board of Appeals in the file, but there should be no interference with the special permit that was issued by the Zoning Board of Appeals on that property. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Brian. Of course you may.
Good evening, Ryan Mann, 109 Cloverfield Way for the board's recollection. My family lives right here at 109 Cloverfield Way, right here. So one of the starred properties. I am a member of the Cavosa Downwinders. A little tongue-in-cheek, sorry. First of all, I would like to thank the board for instituting the mic confusion. It's just a lot of people here, and I want to make sure everybody gets the right information. Thank you very much for addressing that situation. Just a few things that I've heard this evening that I think really resonate with what I'm thinking. I'd like the board to consider. I come over the bridge twice a day, and about 3 weeks ago, there was a large plume of smoke coming from the Bourne landfill site. I understand there was a fire on their brush pile at one point in the last few weeks. There was also a brush fire at the Falmouth location that has been referred to. It burned for 2 days. So it wasn't simply a mismanaged pile. These are things that really do fester for a long time. Regarding those fires, if front-end loaders were what we need to fight fires with, the Falmouth Fire Department would have a lot more of them, and they would have lights on them and sirens, and they'd be going down the road. They don't, okay? And the reason why they don't is because they're not the most efficient way to fight a fire. I would really encourage the board to adhere to the experts on fire. I am not an expert on fire, although I did take a course in wildlife firefighting. I don't believe Mr. Oppenheim is a firefighter as well, and I really sincerely would encourage that the decision of the fire department be considered very, very strongly as the expert. Not because I'm trying to thwart this project, okay? It is not my intention to necessarily thwart this project. It is my intention to make sure that it doesn't thwart anybody else's property values or anybody else's livelihoods. A 900-foot hose length is a long hose length, and it takes a long time to establish that. In addition to 900 feet to that hydrant at the end of Cloverfield Way, it's not just a train easement. I walk my dog along the trails that are back there on the wildlife management area behind my house almost daily. Along those tracks, there is it is really a ditch. You cannot safely traverse down that bank. It is like this. And you can see that if you stop on 151 and look to the north. You can see that big ditch. I think it's important to keep that in mind, that if a fire is starting to burn, it will start burning when it wants to, whether we have the front end loader on site or not. It will also continue to burn until it is put out, and therefore the time that it takes for them to set up the water line, go down the ditch, go up the ditch, turn on the water, get a pumper truck on the other side is substantial. And in that time, these are all trees. These are all trees, and they are all managed as wildlife habitat. A recent burn by the Massachusetts Wildlife Department, who manages the land, Mass Wildlife, they did 40 acres of a controlled burn in one day. That is not unheard of. On Nantucket, a few years ago, I was part of a burn. We did 100 acres in one day. That's controlled burn. That means slow, against the wind. These are things to consider when we're talking about these large piles of compost. I am not a GIS expert, but I would appreciate if we do have in a future meeting, and I don't know if the board purviews this or not, but that there is a orthophoto or image overlay over the lot usage plan that Mr. Kavosa is proposing. The reason why I ask that is because I'm not sure what the maximum coverage of this project is, but from what I can tell, most of Mr. Kavosa's land is in use now. And so I think if he's diverting something away from what he's already doing, there's got to be some way to either manage that or think about the fact that there's a maximum coverage of use. If I want to cover my entire property with something, can I do it? And is that something that the board can address or has addressed, or is there a bylaw that does that? I don't have the answer. That's for the board to think about. I am not familiar with the term windrows. Obviously, we've heard a lot about it. I Googled it the other day, and I looked for pictures of windrows. And I couldn't really find pictures of compost windrows. What I could find were equipment, machines, that turn these types of piles. They look like upside down U's with wheels on each side, and they turn the pile completely. One thing that they say with all these piles, windrows, the definition, they're usually no higher than 4 feet high. The reason for that is A, it's easier for the machine and for it to be turned, as well as the intensity of that heat. I just had a pile of mulch delivered to my house the other day. I'm sure many others have as well. As I was mixing it, I almost got burned from that pile because it gets so hot. And I really think that this is a big thing. 8 feet tall, 8 feet wide, 12 feet wide, 100 plus feet long is a lot of material. And I can't imagine turning that completely and making sure that the temperature at all points of the day don't go above that point where it would be flammable. Another thing that I believe Mr. Kavosa mentioned was that 25% of the windrows was going to be food waste. And 75% was going to be combustible materials. Right, he didn't say that, but they are. They're combustible materials. 75% combustible materials in a pile that's heating up and getting hot, that seems like it could be a real fire hazard very, very quickly. He also mentioned that after 1 month, 30 days, 50%, 60% of it would be compost. Well, if 75% of the pile is already, either loam or combustible materials, meaning grass clippings and wood chips that burn, then you're actually getting out less than what's actually probably breaking down from the food waste. And as it's breaking down, it's creating lots of other things. You're actually getting more of an intensity unless you're putting more and more into it. I'm certain that Mr. Cavosa can find the wood chips. I do know for a fact that he does pay and contractors pay to have wood chips go in. I know that people who like compost will get compost out. So I did a quick calculation in the back of the room. 13,000 cubic yards, which I believe he said. He said tons, but we'll go with cubic yards because I think it's a little bit less than that, 1,100 pounds per ton. At $30 a yard for sale, that's $39,000 out. That's not a little bit of money. That's a substantial chunk. Then he's also getting paid on the way in, and we're not necessarily dictating where he gets that from.
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
can I interrupt? We're not discussing
Odors?
his income.
You're not
No,
odors?
we have discussed odors.
Well, no, let me get.
I
understand. Can I take
let
my
me
point?
let me make my point.
Sure, absolutely, sir.
Okay, we have gone through volumes of information.
Yeah.
I've got bookmarks on my computer a mile long. We have been studying this problem, this application, all the information that's been presented. We have taken in an awful lot of information, and we appreciate the fact that people are taking the time to come out and voice their concerns. But we know that there's a potential for an odor problem. We know there's potential for a vector problem. We know what the problems are. We have a lot of information that I feel we can make a decision based upon. I think, I don't know about the rest of the board, but that's how I feel.
I appreciate that. I'd like to finish
I
this
think
comment.
he's analyzing the finances of it. I think we're off topic on this right away.
Right, and that was
Hold on.
my point.
Okay,
We're off topic.
I appreciate that you think I'm off topic. I'll finish with this two question. Just a little point. If you could get, instead of $30 in, okay, you're getting. Let me, please, sir. I understand that it's off topic, but let me finish, please. If you can get $60 in by getting fish waste.
Madam Chair.
If you can get $60 in by getting fish waste,
Mr. Mann,
it stinks more.
I have to ask
Yes.
you to cease, please, and sit. You've already been told you're off topic.
Yes, my name is Edward Schmidt. I live on Falmouth Woods Road in North Falmouth. That is in the Ballymead section. It may not surprise you to know that I am not in favor of this project. My concerns relate to an issue that has not had a lot of discussion tonight. And it's more about concerns about impact on water. And the water I speak about is the aquifer, which generally lies about 200 feet, I believe, generally below the surface of the land on the Cape. And the Cape is known as a place with a single source aquifer. So all 15 towns on the Cape share that same aquifer. And all
Mr. Schmidt,
15
I'm going
towns
to
on the Cape-
interrupt here because the health department has required that they have a monitoring well in place. So it
But
would,
your questions you posed to the client, to the applicant 2 weeks ago, mentioned drainage issues and water issues, and I would like to make the point that I believe the response they've come back with is inadequate.
Okay.
Because as the testimony by Mr. Oppenheim was that this food waste contains 75% water. Mr. Cavosa used the figure of 70%, so we know what the range is. I also heard testimony that at one point in time the maximum might be 240 tons. I believe that was the testimony. So we were talking about, what was it, 240,000? I'm just 75% of that maximum tonnage at any point in time is going to be water. So what happens to that water? Well, we're hearing from the applicant he's going to have a 12-foot base of loam that's below the other 6-foot high pile of composting material. So you got 12 feet of loam. He's presuming that loam is going to catch everything. He says hopefully it will absorb some of the good stuff, which he described as nitrogen and other beneficial stuff. But he also acknowledged in his own testimony, he mentioned there is bad stuff. This bad stuff is what we've often heard our own DPW director, Ray Jack, talk about, and often he talks about contaminants of emerging concern. I think you've all heard that issue before. And I heard nothing here about ways of capturing or treating or even monitoring for these contaminants of emerging concern. So my real issue here is that there's no way to prevent the water that is reaching its own level, and that level is 200 feet down. That level is a drinking water all 15 towns depend upon. There's no way of, in this plan, of really protecting and giving us assurances that we're not going to have contamination. And we all know there's a history of contamination on the Cape of the water supply, a lot of it coming from the north of Falmouth because the water flies south.
As you're concerned, it is water contamination possibility.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Well, I just hope that I have an adequate opportunity here to express my concerns, because I've heard of other people's testimony here. Mr. Cavosa was given a lot of time for testimony. Mr. Oppenheim, I really think you do need to give all the people here tonight an opportunity.
Stop! This continues. I will say this is over. Do you understand that? You either control yourselves or this hearing will be closed.
Let me just finish by saying I think the only way of really managing that water is to require that there be a impervious liner at the base of the 12 feet of loam to capture all of that water, and if it pools there, it needs to be pumped out into a truck and taken somewhere off Cape and disposed of there. Thank you very much.
I'm already aware of this problem. Thank you. Mr. Sanborn. Thank you. And to the point.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Board. And I will be brief, very brief. Like yourselves, I've studied extensively these issues. I think one of the first comments that was made tonight was how important this is to the town of Falmouth. This is not a Falmouth problem. It's a regional problem. As most of you know who read the article, the town of Bourne has contracted with a large energy company and signed a 15-year lease. They will be installing the necessary equipment adjacent to the Bourne dump to take in food waste. That's a fact. That's a regional solution. Putting this thing in a residential neighborhood is not a regional solution. I'd like to just quickly follow Dr. Sachs's comments, and I'm sorry, the gentleman who imposed some conditions.
Matt McNamara.
Matt McNamara. This is a wonderful article written by a well-known engineer who does a lot of work for Falmouth, currently is involved in Falmouth projects. This article is odor control factors in compost site selection. The entire issue should be added to number 8, which is strategies for evaluation of the potential for odor generation neighborhood impact must include air dispersion modeling, estimations of odor concentrations, flow rates from each source. This study was completed, believe it or not, in 1995. Orleans, Yarmouth here in the Cape, and 2 other facilities in Maine. Most of them had to be shut down because the modeling was not done before the program began.
Mr. Sanborn, is that a copy that we could add to the file so that our board can have easy access?
For $1, yes.
Thank you.
I had planned on speaking about technology that I'm familiar with, which is the equipment, anaerobic equipment. Again, referencing that article, the state of Massachusetts has made available millions of dollars to public entities to put in anaerobic digestion equipment. Those are the solutions that are being looked at because it has been mentioned what has shut down most of these open composting sites has been odor and other issues. A statement was made about your being judge and jury. I don't think you're the judge and jury, but I think you're the stewards. And I couldn't help but quickly look up in our Falmouth, I'm not sure, rules, regulations. You shall be responsible for the physical, economic, and environmental development of our town. That's what the planning board is supposed to be for. And I think in answer to Mr. Cavosa, who's saying I don't need to do this, Mr. Cavosa's current financial well-being will not be affected if this permit is rejected. However, if a permit is granted, it will affect this town, and it will affect this neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Maureen. Remember, I'm asking to be specific about the presentation tonight and keep it new.
Maureen Harlow Hawks, 9 Old Dock Road. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a few questions, and they are new. They're old in the file, but I still don't have an answer. One was, have the lots 10 and 11 been combined as required in the 2002 special permit? There was no tower fall zone shown on this current plan, and I just think it should be on there for the edification of the applicant so that he knows that certain things can't be in there. It was on the old plan, but not on the current plan. There is still no septic shown with distances to the drinking well, and that's not been on any plan. And I just think that should be on the plan. There's nothing in the file from Natural Heritage. This is priority habitat. There are 2 documents in the file showing the location of the NISA sites, and this particular site of Mr. Cavosa's, about 2/3 of it is under NISA. There are no drawdown tests or reports for the existing well in the file. I did go to the Board of Health, and they have no record of the well being installed. But that's very common when they were older wells. So, but that's why it's more important to know what the drawdown is on this well. It has been stated 75 gallons per minute, but there is no facts, no figures, no data in that file to show us that and prove it. There are photos in the file that show large areas of standing water on the site. It has been told to us by Mr. Oppenheim over and over that this is a very pervious area. There are several pictures in there that clearly state that not the truth. Mr. Cavosa has stated constantly at every hearing that he has been doing this for 20 years on this site. I don't know if that's his admission of guilt or that it's illegally done, because in 2002 is when he received the permit, which is 13 years ago, not 20 years ago. And the difference is that he has a permit, under a special permit, to compost leaves, wood chips, stumps, and grinding, which has to go through EP. When he wants to grind the stumps, he can only do it certain times of the year, certain amounts of times. So he has never composted, and if he has been composting garbage on the site, it has been illegally composted, and that might be why there were no complaints, because I'm sure he's not composting garbage. And I am sorry that Mr. Oppenheim was miffed at probably the most important document in that file, and that was from the fire department. And it has been brought up by this board, by some members tonight so I'm not going to belabor it. Obviously you've read it, and they didn't meet many of the requirements and recommendations of the fire department, and I don't think the fire department makes their recommendations in haste. They make them for their responsibility is public safety, not the benefit of a person making money, not of a person having a good time, not miffing people off. They do it for public safety. This property abuts 10,000 acres of woodland with ladder fuel in it. When it jumps the track, if it jumps 151, if it just goes right across the power line into Crane Wildlife, you're putting people at risk. They're called firefighters. And this is over garbage. So I think that being miffed is rather disingenuous to say about the fire department. My son is a firefighter and born, and he told me something. I know nothing about this, and I'm sure there's a specialist somewhere in the room or somewhere. There's called a friction loss in 1,000 feet of hose. I don't know what that really means, but he told me you have to have as much water pressure as needed to have a minimum buffer of 20 psi, and what is the flow with the reduced pressure?
Sir.
Okay.
Sir.
All right. Well, somebody should look into that. I'm sure somebody will. The fire department. And Bourne used 100,000 gallons from their storage cistern at the Bourne landfill, and they used it in less than a half hour, and they still did not put the fire out in that transfer station building that was inside a building. So I just hope that the board, and I'm sure you will because you do due diligence, the fire department was the most disturbing thing in that file. One last question, and maybe through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Oppenheim could tell us this. Why were all the distances calculated from the centers of the compost piles and not on the leading edges that were the closest to the neighbors, which does make a difference? And that's all. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Do you have an answer to that, Jeff? Because I'm curious about that, too.
I'm not sure what distances.
Rather than the edges of the piles.
All the distances to our 10 closest neighbors were calculated from the center of the compost pile.
But why rather than the edges? That was. Okay, so there is a lack of knowledge here as to how it was.
They're measured from the center of the compost pile.
The compost pile is 50 feet wide.
Sir,
You're adding 25 feet.
Stop now. Yes, sir. You'll answer that.
Steve Perry, Casmer and Edwards, and I will be brief. Just respond to some of what we heard today. I want to comment first on some of what's been said about the size of the operation and what was called confusion between whether it was going to be 30 tons a day up to 105 tons a week, or what we've heard in the latest submission, which is, I guess, 25 tons a week. That was not confusion of my making or of any of the people in the room. It's a matter of record that in the questions and answers that Mr. Oppenheim put in writing in the previous go-around, not the most recent one, as well as in the April 21 meeting, he said that his original presentation to this board was an error when he said 30 tons a week, and that it was 30 tons a day. So if people wrote letters to the editor or petitions that cited those numbers, that was not the fault of anybody being hysterical. And as you will recall, I then presented to the board something showing you that he couldn't possibly fit that much food waste on his site, and he's now essentially conceded it, saying we're cutting it down to the levels you have here because we're only using a third of an acre, and tacitly conceding that what he came in with originally violated DEP regs because it was too much compost for the usable part of the land, because as you recall, I said last time, he's not allowed to count 5 acres that he's not using as part of the compost operation. So I just wanted to clarify that. I understand it's not really in dispute anymore because you're looking at what he's now come back with, the scaled-down proposal, but the way it was presented made it sound like people were misrepresenting what he had asked for, and that just isn't true. He scaled it back. It's still a very intense site. He's still cramming this into a site that is being used for many other purposes. The second thing I wanted to mention is in the questions and answers this board gave to the applicant to respond to, there was a reference to 310 section 19 of the DEP regs, and it made me wonder. I wanted to make sure that everybody on the board was aware that the planning board version of the ordinance that went to town meeting was altered, and it did not come back with a reference to 310 section 19. And the language that got adopted, which I'm taking from the certified copy of the ordinance after the town meeting that took place, was one that included the following condition. It says, no special permit may issue unless the applicant incorporates procedures and practices in accordance with all applicable Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection regulations. So therefore, you cannot grant the special permit unless you're satisfied that what has been presented to you complies with section 16.04. You have in front of you a detailed report from a qualified engineer, or not an engineer, but a scientist, that says that best management practices have not been incorporated into this operation. So I want to tie that into DEP regs. The ordinance, again, requires compliance with DEP regs. The DEP regs, in turn, this is quoted in Dr. Sachs's report, I think on page 3, says that the applicant must ensure that the operation incorporates best management practices, including but not limited to, and then it lists a bunch of things. So this ties directly to the evidence you have about whether he has done that. And I want to just very briefly touch on what those are without repeating what you've already heard. One is best management practices for maintaining proper thermal regulation and monitoring to prevent spontaneous combustion and destroy pathogens. You have a written report that condition has not been met. Next, managing stormwater and leachate to prevent ponding and water pollution. It sounds like there might be a question of ponding. I'm not really prepared to address that. Third, this is in the DEP regs, and this really, I think, just kills the project right here. It's a requirement of DEP regs because they know the fire hazards that are associated with composting, that the best management practices include, quote, maintaining access to an adequate water supply with adequate pressure for fire control, unquote. And you've been told by your own fire department that that condition is not met, and that's a DEP requirement. So having somebody come in and say it rains a lot, don't worry about fire, or our pile is not going to catch fire, that's not up to you to decide. The DEP has spoken. They say you have to have adequate water and adequate pressure, and your fire department has told you that you don't have that. And the idea that you're going to rely on hydrants that are either down a ditch or across a state highway and shut down the highway while you try to put out a fire, those are not realistic, and that's why the fire department has given you that referral. So I think you have to take that at face value, and you have to look at the fact that really we don't have compliance with a DEP reg on that issue. In addition, the DEP regs require the implementation of an odor control plan that is appropriate for the size and type of the operation and that will minimize the production and migration of odorous compounds. And I want to suggest that, again, you have a report that suggests that that requirement has not been met. And the DEP regs have the exact same requirement that you have implemented best management practices for a vector control plan, and you have a report in front of you that says that requirement is also not met. There's also a requirement in the DEP regs that you employ an appropriate number of properly trained personnel for the size and type of the operation, and there's no evidence in front of you that that requirement is met. You're told that a yard manager who works there will be taking care of this, and there's no indication that he has, and I'm not saying he does or does not, but there's no indication in the record that he has the training with respect to carbon and nitrogen levels and temperature and moisture and all the rest you heard about to do this. So because the DEP requirements are not met, the requirements for the special permit are not met either, even before you get to the weighing of benefits versus adverse effects. With regard to that, very briefly on the impact on the neighborhood and the benefits, I just want to echo what Mr. Sanford said. The prevailing technology that people are trying to turn to are enclosed anaerobic and aerobic digesters. That's a much more efficient way of doing it. It harnesses the energy and doesn't create the kinds of adverse impacts, and this is not a suitable location for an open-air composting site. In addition, I was going to make the same point about the measurements, and just to give you my back-of-the-envelope calculation, if you're looking at, I think it was 180 feet by, was it 80? If you look at from the center of that to the corners, you're looking about 100 feet. It's 90, and it's a little more because it's the angle. So everything's 100 feet closer. And also, this board asked for measurements to the houses, and that's what it got. But if you look at the 23 Falmouth Woods property, that yard is hundreds of feet closer to the compost area than you take off the 100 feet and take a few hundred feet more off, because look at where that yard is in relation to the house that's to the west. So I do think those measurements are inaccurate. And lastly, I want to draw your specific attention, if you would, take a look at, when you get a chance, at the wind charts that are contained in Dr. Sachs's report. because they show you in color where the winds come from, and as Dr. Sachs told you, they actually come from all over in the spring and fall. And we've had pretty warm weather in the spring and fall at times. I'm sure warmer where I am than on the Cape, but still. And you will have odors downwind from this facility, and those winds will at times come from the north, and at times they'll come from the west. In fact, about the only place where the winds rarely come from is from the east. So that means Mr. Kavos's operation is upwind of the compost area, but nothing else really is. That's really all I have to add. Thank you.
Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Virginia Valiela, Precinct 5. I have 2 points. The first has to do with the monitoring well. I attended the Board of Health meeting at which they discussed and then made their recommendation. If this board decides to grant the composting operation, the Board of Health made it very clear that the applicant had to come back to them to discuss the location of the well and the protocol. As it's currently, if there is something to be discussed, I would take issue with exactly where they've put it at the moment. So I wanted to make sure that that condition would appear. My major point has to do with the information that's been provided on Exhibit A of Mr. Oppenheim's most recent submittal. It's page 8, in which he talks about the dimensions of the windrow and concludes in the last line that each windrow will have only 80 cubic yards of food waste. And I concur with that math, but there is a disconnect between the tonnage that's being collected and the cubic yards, and I would like to walk you through that. If Mr. Sinsakis will step aside for a minute so that everybody can see the toter again, that's 9 cubic feet. And you heard tonight that there are 135 toters per week. That's what gets him to his 5 tons per day, 25 tons per week. And if you take the cubic area of those toters, multiply by 135 toters, you get obviously cubic feet, and then you divide by 27 cubic feet per cubic yard. And it turns out that in 1 week there are 45 cubic yards of food waste coming in. For simplicity of math, I'm going to say it's 40. So you have 40 cubic yards per week of food waste coming in, and each windrow will have 80 cubic yards. So in week 1, half a windrow is built, and the other 75% are added to the food waste. And in the second week, the rest of the first windrow will be built. And then in the third week, you start on the second windrow and so on. And by the end of 8 weeks, you have built 4 windrows with 25% of the food waste being part of that windrow. But it takes 90 days to compost. So you've built 4 windrows in 8 weeks, and you've still got 4.5 weeks to go. So what he's asking for in terms of the number of toters or number of tonnage exceeds the area that he has designated for you to compost. So this project, as proposed, is too big for the site that it's on. I completely agree with lots of the other issues that have been brought up, but I basically think you have to deny this project. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Can this be the last one?
I hope so.
My name is Sue Lasordo. I live at 79 Cloverfield Way, and I've lived there before any of these people lived anywhere. Ballymead was a dream. Cabosas was a sand pit. I grew up in North Falmouth. I bought the property out there when there wasn't a single residence because we wanted to have a farm. And having a farm, you have all these things, the flies, the smells, the issues that you don't want other people to have to deal with. So we were out there all by ourselves, and then growth came, that's fine, I love it. And then Ballymead came, and our neighbors on our street came with all kinds of the same ideas. They wanted to be where we wouldn't impact others. And when we built our home, we built a little house that we could sustain, nothing huge, but something we would stay with all our lives.
Is your comment on something that's been brought out tonight?
Well, I could say that. The odors, everything has been
Yeah,
covered.
but what I'm getting from you is you're really upset at a change in your way of life that this may make.
Well,
Is
I
that
just
correct?
want people to understand that it really will impact lives.
I think we do understand that.
Okay, and do we understand the tourism? All the bikers that come and
This
use
has
those trails?
already been presented
I
to
haven't
all
heard
of
it.
us. It has been presented to us.
All the people on the golf courses that will be impacted, all the people that travel the road?
We had 6 hours of testimony before,
Okay, so
and
I
it
just
covered
want
all
to
of
make sure you
that.
were listening.
Indeed.
One more thing. If I was a respected person of this
I
community-
meant it when I said I will close this hearing. Any more of that, and this hearing is closed. Do you understand? Yes, sir.
I just want to say
Please,
one more
come up.
thing. If I was a respected gentleman of this community who helped others because he cared, why wouldn't he walk up here and withdraw his application when he sees
Please,
how
ma'am,
much it
this
affects
is
the people?
not germane to what is on the table tonight.
Good evening, members of the board, everyone. My name is Joe Noveline. I live on Karen Ridge Road. We've got a major issue here, and even though we've talked about a lot of technical aspects, and as you can see, the residents as well as Mr. Cavassa's people have done an awful lot of work, a lot of research. We've heard a lot of information, but the real basic issue here is your approval of this permit is endorsing a form of composting for the town of Falmouth as its first commercial food waste enterprise, which out of the three that's available is the worst. It is the most, from an environmental standpoint. And if in fact the planning board feels that the town needs composting, Mr. Cavassa has already stated that this is a test on his part to see how this works. I think the first decision the planning board and the town needs to make is, what kind of a composting operation do you want in this town? Do we want to go to an anaerobic, which has no environmental issues, costs more money, but in the end will be the process that everybody is going to nowadays because of the environment? Or are you going to issue a permit to test out an open compost pile, which is the one that's the most contaminating to the environment? I think that's the decision that you are in the process of making, and I think you have to weigh that very heavily when you decide on this permit.
Madam Chair, I believe I've heard enough. I would like to make a motion that we close the hearing at this time.
I would second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion of the board on this?
I'm curious how many more people will be interested in
Well,
presenting
we
new
have a
information.
motion.
There's no new information.
We have a motion on the table.
Well, you said discussion.
Yes, but I'm not going to poll.
No.
Okay.
I haven't heard anything new for a long time.
I haven't either. So, okay, all. Yes.
Can I make one comment?
We've got a motion on the floor, sir.
The point of order, you guys were taking objective and forward. I'm an employee since 2008. I do have something that.
Pardon?
He says he's for it. Maybe we
I have a motion on.
There is a motion on the table to close.
I've seconded the
hearing,
motion.
and it's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? This hearing is closed. Thank you all for coming tonight. We will be deliberating starting, well, next week is the election, so we'll
They don't care.
be deliberating on the 26th. Thank you, Bob. It was just me trying to...
Yeah, I know.
Stay
And
back.
believe me,
Stay back.
we do our
Ryan,
homework.
Stay back.
Thank
Don't
you.
come up. Stay back.
He says, yeah.
Him.